Welcome to the Power of Love show sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Power of Love show sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. I am TJ Jackson, and with me is my eldest brother, Taj Jackson.
What's up? I got a lot of chaos going on upstairs, so that's why I'm trying to spare everyone. There's some screaming going on, some babies screaming. So
go back to mute, my man. Go back to mute. Okay, so we, of course, for everyone who's watching or maybe listening to us, we are live right now on Wednesday, May 25, 1 o'clock. So if you're listening to us or watching us, we want to thank you for joining us. Later on, the show will be posted as a podcast. So if you are live watching us on Facebook or YouTube and you are like, I have to go, but I want to hear more of this, remember, you can always listen to us and catch up there on a podcast on all the major podcast platforms. With all that said, we are not licensed therapists. We are just ordinary people who've experienced loss in our lives. We've been impacted by it and we have learned from it. And we like to share our opinions in an attempt to help you get through whatever it is you may be going through. Saying that if you need professional help, we urge you to seek it and to find it. Another thing we have to talk about is before we start is that if you enjoy the show, we here at the D.D. Jackson Foundation would love to invite you to donate to our organization to help provide music therapy classes for grieving children. You could do so here on YouTube or on Facebook or on our website. Just go to www.ddjf.org. Taj Jackson, I will start off by asking, how are you doing today?
good. Everything's going well. We had just baby stuff, kid stuff, in general. But everything's going well. Just trying not to get too crazy with everything that's going on in the world. Because that obviously affects everyone and affects us as well. So it's trying to stay positive in an environment where there's a lot of not only negativity, just craziness going on. So
Taj, as a young, I almost said a young parent, but you're older than me, and I don't consider myself a young parent. But as a parent to younger kids who haven't started, I froze. You can hear me, right? You froze.
I froze. Great. All right.
Okay, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about that. As long as we can hear you. You are not a young parent.
But I heard that part. Yeah.
As a parent to young kids, does what happened yesterday, the shooting in Uvalde, Texas? First of all, before I even ask you, we want to send condolences, light, and love, hugs, prayers, everything to those families and friends directly affected in Texas. My question to you is, Taj, does this concern you with sending your kids off to school?
It happened before anyway. In general, just there's a lot of stuff going on at schools, so this is just another red flag, I would say, in that. But it had been a discussion we had prior to that. Luckily, we have some time before Taylor is officially going to school. But yeah, we've been kind of flirting with the homeschooling thing for a long time anyway. And that and the fact that it always seems like nothing gets done after these tragedies doesn't make us feel any safer or better in that, because I can't imagine dropping your kid off at school and thinking it's a place of safety and then not being able to pick up that kid afterwards. And it's every parent's nightmare, but it's something needs to be done. Obviously, I mean, I don't think there's anyone that's in disagreement with that. It's just there's all these. I hate when politics gets in the way of common sense and logic. Politics and money, I would say,
gets in that way. So
that's the frustrating thing. I would say that's what's bothering me. That's why I have one eye open watching it and learning, but another eye closed because it's like it's so much, and it really can consume you in terms of bringing you down. So
Well, Taj, I will say this, man. I thought your answer was very well talked about. Politics should not ever supersede humanity. And these are young kids who are going to their safety, who had, their favorite cartoons on earlier, who were telling jokes, who were excited for the summer to play games, not able to do so. And politics aside, shouldn't be discussed. What needs to happen is we need to all come together and figure a solution to limit these, to ban, to make sure this never happens again.
yeah, we're the
Uh,
only country that this happens to. There's a
yeah,
reason.
the in the last, I think it was 2009 to 2018, the USA had 26 times. I'm sorry, 6 times as many school shootings as 26 or 28 other countries combined.
Yeah,
So not only did we have more than 26 other countries combined, we had 6 times the amount of
yeah,
26 other countries.
yeah,
So it shows that we are so far behind the ball, and we owe that to um, the school system to do something about it.
to our kids and to the next generation.
Taj, anything else? I mean, as far as my week's, same old. This is what trumps it, in my opinion, is the
Yeah,
shooting. It's been on my mind, and my week and what I did is
yeah,
irrelevant.
that's why I didn't go to what I've been doing this week because it honestly doesn't really matter in that
Yeah,
way, and it's
yeah,
one of those things that I hope this is we don't get numb to it, and in that way because that's the biggest tragedy. Sandy Hook happened 10 years ago, and it seems like we haven't made any progress since then.
yeah.
And
School shootings have went up a lot
yeah,
since the 2000s.
just
Like
yeah,
in the 80s or 90s, it was like one school shooting a year, and now we've already had 3 or 4 so far this year, and like the last 5 years, outside of the COVID years, quarantining, pandemic years, we've been at anywhere from 8 to 13. So it's
yeah,
becoming more of a serious issue.
yep,
Um, all right. Well, Taj, with all of that said, we have a wonderful guest on our show, coming on our show today. On
wonderful.
today's on today's episode of The Power of Love, we welcome special guest, President of Hope After Grief Inc., Miss Sydney Ford. Sydney Ford is a graduate of the University of South Carolina with a degree in public relations and a
Nice.
graduate of the Emory University School of Law, where she obtained her juris doctorate degree. Taj, where's Emory?
I don't know.
Georgia.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah, there you go, Taj. All right, great
so I
help.
failed. I failed the test.
Yeah, you failed. But anyways, Sydney, I'm interrupting Sydney's intro. I'm sorry. Sydney, she has been a juvenile defense attorney for the
Yeah.
past few years and followed this path because of the number of grieving children involved in the juvenile justice system. Sydney's article on trauma-informed pre-trial diversion programs for our grieving youth in the juvenile justice system was selected for publication by the Northwestern Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology Online. She has also recently testified for the South Carolina Joint Committee on Children in favor of providing grief resources for children in South Carolina schools. Sydney wrote and published her own children's book, Grief Came to Visit Today, and
Mm.
launched a nonprofit organization called Hope After Grief, Inc., that provides scholarships to high school seniors who have had a parent or sibling die. Sydney lost her dad when she was 10 years old and became an advocate for grieving children at age 16, when she began going into elementary schools and talking to classes about the emotions associated with grief. Since that time, she has found ways to support grieving children by becoming a board member for the National Alliance for Children's Grief, becoming a buddy and ambassador for Kate's Club, and meeting with senators and the South Carolina Superintendent of Education to advocate for our grieving youth. Without further ado, everyone, please welcome to the Power of Love show, the one and only Sydney Ford. Sydney.
Hello.
Round of applause. Round of applause. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. How are you?
Doing well. Doing very well. Still a little shaken up from yesterday's event. I think as most are. Um, I have a question before I get into my list of
Mhm.
questions that were prepared
Yeah.
prior to yesterday's event. When something like yesterday happens, what goes through your mind?
My first thought is all of the children in that elementary school who are now going to be experiencing not only grief, but trauma due to the incident that happened. Those families, the children in those families who lost siblings, and now how we have to sit down and talk to all of our children about trauma. And like you mentioned, I advocate for trauma informed care. And so now it's okay, we have to sit down and talk to all of these kids about things that they shouldn't have to experience at this age and that they shouldn't have to talk about. And so for me, my first thought is all of the kids who now have to grow up a lot earlier than they should have to.
Yeah. What do you, Sydney? And obviously this is a serious issue uh, that has been ongoing. What comes to your gut on the fix? What do you initially like? What is your instinct on how we can fix this issue? And I don't want you to get political. That's not my goal. So don't fall for that. I'm just saying, is there anything that you think can help this situation?
Well, it's hard not to get political in a sense because the people who can make the changes are the people in power. You know,
Okay.
you and I can do little things, but we can't make drastic changes across this nation. And it's happening across our nation. It's not something that, we can actively change within our community, as it's more so just something nationwide that has to happen. And
Mm,
so for me, it's not just making rules about gun control and changing that, but it's also, healthcare for all so that people are getting the support and help when they need it. And it's not necessarily, just um, the victims in this case, but other community members that they can get that help and that support because we create this cycle of trauma when we don't step in and provide support. And so for me, I mean, yes, gun control is something that I'm a firm advocate for, but I also think we really need to provide healthcare services as far as therapy and
mhm.
counseling, whether it be in our schools, whether it be in our communities for free and where people have access to them. So people aren't fighting for resources and for help that they need.
Off the top of your head, what is something that we are severely in need of in that mindset, whether it's the therapy or grieving, to help these kids that go through such traumatic situations, whether it's a school shooting, whether it's a playground, whether it's just a loss of a life? Is there anything that you feel we, our government, our communities can do to make a positive impact to help these kids get through these incredibly difficult situations?
We truly need more counselors in our schools. I visited so many schools where there's one counselor per 900 students. And we expect these counselors to do all these administrative duties, do like statewide testing, things like that, and then also be able to help our children. And that's just not realistic. That counselor doesn't have time to talk to one of the students when a teacher brings them in and says, "Hey, I've noticed something going on with them. They're struggling at home or they're struggling in school. Let's sit down and chat with them." The counselor doesn't have time to do that because they have all these other things they have to do. So I really think we need more counselors nationwide to ensure that they're getting the support. Right now teachers are doing double duty with that. They're being the counselor,
Mm,
they're being a parent, they're being a teacher. And so for me, funding counselors will take the load off of teachers, but my mother was a principal, so I'll also advocate for teachers being paid more as well
mhm.
because they're doing all of these jobs as is.
Yeah, very great answer. So thank you for that, Sydney. Now, focusing on you and your life, you have done so much admirable work to support grieving youth,
Thank you.
from writing a children's grief book that we're going to discuss later, and advocating in the courtroom to launching both a nonprofit organization and providing scholarships to grieving youth. That is amazing.
Thank you.
How did this passion for this type of work begin for you?
As you mentioned in my introduction, my dad died when I was 10 years old. And at the time, I didn't really think my grief would define who I was or my future. It was just something that happened to me and I was going about my life. When I turned 16, I realized that I hadn't really done much with my grief in the sense of dealing with it and coping with it. I'd kind of pushed it to the back burner and expected it to just go away. And it had not gone away. I started
Mm,
dealing with anxiety, panic attacks, depression because of all of this that I had internalized. And so for me, I realized how many kids were doing the same thing and decided that it was important to go out and talk to these kids and ensure that they were dealing with their grief better than I had.
yeah, it reminds me, for us, at least I've always made it that, when I lost my mom when I turned 16 in 94, and there just wasn't that much out there, and it was hard enough dealing with the situation. And I think that's why years later, this is such an important, and obviously it's for my brothers too, but I'm the one speaking, so I can only say for me, but it's such an important purpose, is when you lose a parent at a young age, it becomes part of who you are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's been an important thing. Todd, did you want to add something to that?
No, yeah, I mean, exactly. There was no that we had very little resource for us.
Mhm.
It was super hard in that way, and I'm so happy that there's more resources out there. That's why I commend what you're doing in that way, because it's filling this void. Um, and yeah, it definitely defines you, as you know as well,
Mhm.
in that way. One thing that me and TJ always talk about, it was me and my two brothers, and we all dealt with grief differently in
Mhm.
that way, even though we were under the same household, even though I considered us extremely close, we just dealt with it differently.
Mhm.
Three different personalities in that way. So it really taught me that there's no real way to deal with grief. Like,
Mhm.
everyone deals with it differently, but you can help people navigate through it.
And I try to emphasize that so much that grief is so individualized, especially among kids in the same family,
Mm.
among parents, cousins, aunts, uncles. Everyone's different because everyone has a different relationship with that person. Everyone has different emotions when they think of that person. Everyone has different memories with that person. And so grief is so different in regards to each individualized person. And so I really do emphasize that especially when I talk to parents who say, I feel like my kids should be doing this and they're not, there's just no right way about it.
Mm, mm. So I have a question for you, Sydney. And actually, let me say it this way: I'll present the original question, and then I'll ask the community uh, if they know this answer, because we asked you a question before we started. But my original question is: there are many avenues one could take to advocate for grieving youth, but
Mhm.
you decided to become a lawyer. So, what inspired you to take the path of becoming a lawyer? And yeah, I'll still ask the community. Community, if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, you will see after Sydney's name is ESQ. Um, I didn't know what that meant. Taj failed the test as well.
No
Um,
cheating though. They can't look it up. They have
No
to.
yeah, don't
Google.
look at what. So, community, what does ESQ stand for? And then, if you don't mind, Sydney, we'll let you answer that after you explain why you wanted to go the path of becoming a lawyer. Uh, I would
Okay.
love to hear that.
So it wasn't my intention to take the grief path when I went to law school. I thought I wanted to go into media law, I'm sure you guys know all about media law. And so that's the path I thought I wanted to take. I did a juvenile defender clinic, and it's one of those things where I think our purpose tends to find us. And it was laid into my lap, and I went in and realized all the kids who had experienced some kind of loss and were grieving ended up in the juvenile justice system. When you
Mm,
look at the data, the majority of kids in the juvenile justice system have experienced grief or some kind of trauma. And so for me, it was one of those things where I said, okay, I've been doing all this for so long, and this is right here in front of me. I think it's meant to be. And I made sure that when I was advocating for my kids in the courtroom, that I was expressing what got them to where they were, but then also helping them with those resources after. Instead of just making it about their case, I wanted them to not have recidivism and be back in the courtroom. I wanted to change their lives when they left. I'm now at a legal aid organization, so I don't work with kids anymore, but we still see a lot of the same thing with housing clients, people who are facing eviction. There was a client who recently, her mother died during the pandemic. She was in high school at the time. She was working 2 jobs to make ends meet and was facing eviction. You still have that grief overlap in all legal matters. It really is an underlying thing. And, maybe it's because so many people nationwide are experiencing grief. But I also think part of it is because grief and loss lead to other things in our lives, especially if we don't have assistance and resources.
It's a great answer. Um, Very good answers. Thank you for that, Sydney. All right, so now we have some guesses. Clarice says Esquire, Fami says Esquire, and Denise says Esquire. So go ahead, Sydney. What does the ESQ stand for?
It is Esquire. When you graduate from law school, you can put JD behind the name, but once you pass the bar exam, you're officially an Esquire. So since you're a certified attorney, that's when you can add it.
Sweet, sweet. That's a huge accomplishment. Like I said before we went live, that's more than Taj and I combined have accomplished. So
I said at that time that is not true. So.
She did say that.
She
But
did.
either way, well done, Sydney. Well done. So I'm curious to know about your motivation for launching a nonprofit organization, Hope After Grief Inc. And that provides scholarships to grieving high school seniors, which is unbelievable. So what's the story behind that?
Like I mentioned, my entire grief journey has been kind of this thing where things would fall into my lap and I was like, okay, this is my purpose. This is why I'm here, which is why I'm a firm believer in, fate and destiny are going to take us along our path. And it's up to you to grab those moments and those opportunities and run with them full force. It was during COVID. I saw someone who was raising funds for funeral expenses. I remembered that they had a high school senior. They had several kids still in school. And in my mind, I thought about how they were raising money for funeral expenses after all of their losses during COVID, and how this child was about to graduate and have to go to college, and how much money they were going to have to put towards that too. And so for me, I just realized the funeral expenses, hospital bills, everything just adds up. And when you're someone who is also having to go to college, like my housing client we just mentioned, actually one of my scholarship recipients lost both her grandmother and mother to COVID, and worked several jobs in high school so that she could be able to go to college and get a career and do what she wanted to do. I thought, wouldn't it be great to just be able to provide some assistance to these kids so that they're not struggling for the rest of their life, and that they're able to do what they want to do, and that their loss isn't something that completely prevents them from chasing their dreams, because for so many people it does. And so for me, I know it's not going to change someone's life. It's not going to fix their grief, but I did name it Hope After Grief, and hope that it helps someone and that it does give someone hope that there is a future for them beyond this loss.
That's spectacular. It's amazing. I'd like to know, how do people donate to your scholarship fund?
Yes, there's a donate link at hopeaftergrief.org. I believe he's going to put the website up
There
for
it
me so that you
is.
can see. Yes,
There
right
it
on
is.
it. There is a donate link there, and it comes straight to us. And so for me, that's the best way to donate right now. We are a 501c3, so everything is tax deductible, and it really does go to help. We had actually 2 recipients in South Carolina this year because someone decided to sponsor an entire scholarship for an additional recipient. So we were able to give 2 recipients in South Carolina and 1 in Georgia. And it's amazing to see all the applications. We were able to reach so many counties. This was only our 2nd year, and we expanded tenfold this year. But also the stories are always so hard to read, and I'm a crier anyway. And so I have to get judges to judge the applications, and then I go back and read the winners after, because if I read all the applications as they come through, I would sob all day. So for me, I have to limit myself on it, because it really is crazy how much loss our teenagers are experiencing and have experienced through their lives.
Mm. All right. So you guys here at hopeaftergrief.org, go over there, make a donation.
I have a question, TJ.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tosh.
So with Hope After Grief, what in an ideal world, she says it's your second year,
Mhm.
what do you plan? Like what would be the pie in the sky for this?
My
in the
pie in
sky?
the sky is to be able to fund a full ride. That's my end goal, is to have a student who can go to school without having to worry about any of their college expenses, no student loans, anything. It's not something that later on they're going to say, oh, I'm working all of these jobs to make ends meet. I want them to be able to put that aside and not have that additional worry in their life,
Right.
because grief and everything that comes with it already weighs heavily enough. To add in student loans and student debt and school and everything else,
Mhm.
it really does weigh heavily. So for me, that's the dream goal one day.
Got it. Cool.
I think that's spectacular.
Yes.
I think it's an amazing thing. Actually, what I love is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cindy, you're targeting, or the recipients must be kids who have lost a parent or sibling, as I
That's
mentioned
correct.
earlier. I think that's fantastic. And because they're the ones who are grieving, and like you said, they don't need that additional concern and fear and worry of finance during that amazing and difficult time.
Mhm. And
I
especially,
remember.
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, especially when losing a parent, you're
Oh
also
my
sometimes
goodness.
losing either the sole income in the family, a substantial amount of the income in the family. And so that automatically just reduces all the resources that family has exponentially.
And you were younger than me, Sydney. But when my mother was murdered, it was late August, and I remember just starting school. I think it was junior year, and the mentality I had was just hopelessness, not caring, whatever, going through the motions. Nothing else really mattered, and I was fortunate because of my family that I didn't have any financial, you know, issues. I didn't have
Mhm.
any financial burdens. I can only imagine if financial was added to that equation, how much difficult adjusting and going on with my life would be. It was already incredibly hopeless and despondent and just a sad and difficult time without the financial burdens and financial restrictions of being able to achieve what I wanted to do. So I love what you're doing. I would love to know, how can qualified teens apply to be considered for a scholarship?
It's also on the link at that website is where our application is. We will open up in January of next year for our 2023 applicants. We open up for a period of about 6 months each year. We just closed and announced our applicants for last year. Right now, we're only in South Carolina and Georgia because that's where we're nonprofit certified. But like I said, with the full ride, we're also hoping to expand nationwide. And we're able to do that with additional funds and additional growth. So for me, that's the end goal. Like I said, we're only in year 2. But kind of going back to what you were saying, I did have one of our winners last year who was working 4 or 5 jobs because he lost both parents, working 4 to 5 jobs a week while also playing football because he wanted to get a football scholarship. So there really is so many kids out there who are fighting for success and just fighting to see another day and have some kind of future goals. And so that's what we're trying to do out here.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a bit, because not only do you have this going on, hopeaftergrief.org, and the scholarships, but you are also an author.
My mom is like, why don't you just add more to your plate?
I think that's so cool. That's something I've always wanted to do, is write a book and then a children's book. So you are someone I'm looking up to. But tell us about your children's book, Grief Came to Visit Today. Where can we get a copy?
So it's available on Amazon. We actually sold out through Barnes and Noble online as well as Target. So it's not available on there anymore, but it is available still on Amazon. It goes back to what I said earlier about when you have a purpose and something just kind of falls into your lap because it's meant to be. That's really what happened here. My best friend from childhood passed away unexpectedly. And as I was laying in bed one night, I thought about the fact that I had experienced grief, and here grief was again. And it was all those same emotions all over again. And it brought so many feelings back that I had kind of forgotten about because it had been so long since my dad died. And in my head, I just thought, oh, grief is here to visit again. And that's where the idea came from for the book. I wrote about the emotions that grief brings. So grief has a little suitcase that he comes with, and all these emotions are in it. And he gives them to the main character, and the main character experiences them. And it addresses those emotions that are common and the ones you may think about. But we also mentioned some that people don't necessarily think about with grief, like guilt or jealousy, and those hidden emotions that people don't always talk about. So for me, it was just making sure that kids have kind of a starting point so they can go to whoever is their caregiver and say, hey, this emotion kind of looks like how I'm feeling, or hey, this is something that I experienced. I had someone send me a picture of their kid who was reading the book and said, he keeps asking if he can read the grief book again. And, it wasn't my intention to make it like, oh, this is such a fun read, but it was my intention to make it a resource so that people are able to start those conversations with kids because of it.
Yeah, as Denise says, that title is perfect. Grief came to visit today. Okay, so amazing. I've always said, first of all, let me say it this way. I was 16. My mom passed. It was books that helped me, obviously family too, but books played a big role in my quote unquote recovery and me feeling normalized again. So I'm a big advocate of books, especially in this realm, and we don't have enough. So I applaud you for writing a book on grief for children. Who in particular do you feel the book is for? Who should be reading this book?
Children ages 3 to 10. That elementary school age is probably best for this book due to the fact that it is, it's more about emotions, and it's not exactly, it's a picture book. So it's not something that's exactly for older kids, but that's not to say that older kids can't read it and understand what's in it, because they all experience those emotions too. But I did write it for the intention of the younger kids who may struggle with identifying the emotions that they're feeling, and they may look at something and not really know how to express it. So this book is to be used as a resource for those kids.
It's great. And again, to confirm, just Amazon right now, right? Not Barnes and
Correct.
Noble.
We did
Sold
sell out on Barnes and Noble. So
That's a beautiful thing. Taj, are you okay? Do you have a question?
No, I was going to ask who's it for, but you already. I was going to ask what age range in that way, but
Okay.
yeah.
You got sidelined on that one.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
always do. But it's good.
You snooze, you lose. You snooze.
Got to be quick
you
off the
lose.
jump,
Okay, so Sydney, I'd love to know, with everything you have going on, Hope After Grief, the children's book Grief Came to Visit Today. I know you've learned something, because I can kind of relate to what you're going through, and Taj can too with DDJF. But I'd love to know, what have you learned about yourself, and has it changed, your perception of grief from working around this grief space?
Oh, absolutely. When I started talking to kids about grief, that was when I actually dealt with my own grief. It was ironic because I would go into classrooms and talk to children about the grief process, and I would like have a soda bottle and shake it up and take the lid off. And I'm like, this is what happens when you bottle up your grief. It explodes. And the irony in it is that I was that person. And I was saying, oh, you guys should do this, this, and this. And it was stuff that I hadn't even done. And I knew actively that I should be doing it. But it wasn't until, high school, when the panic attacks, the depression, and everything hit. And I realized I had put it all on the back burner, going about my life. I threw myself into dance and all these other activities and cheerleading and schoolwork, and said, okay, if I keep doing all this stuff, then I don't actually have to pay attention to these emotions, and they'll just go away. And that's not what happened. It came back full force, and it was like grief came to visit, knocking on the door saying, all right, we have to deal with this. And so for me, I was forced to deal with it by talking to kids about the grief process. And I truly benefited because now I know about those emotions within myself. I can identify them. I can identify where certain fears and things come from. And I can pinpoint a lot of my life experiences back to those emotions and know now where they came from and how I deal with them when they arrive.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was gonna ask in terms of, can you identify now? Because I think a lot of our listeners um, are new to grief,
Mhm.
some of our listeners are
Mhm.
new to grief in that way,
For
and
example,
yeah.
just going off of that, for example, I always was afraid of nighttime and I couldn't pinpoint
Mhm,
why. Like, I always had this existential dread when it was time for bed every night. Like, why
mhm,
did I always like hate this? My dad died in the middle of the night.
Mm,
It was an unexpected heart attack in the middle of the night. And so for me, that just naturally arose with it. And it wasn't until I sat and talked to, a therapist and talked about that situation. And she was like, like this is where that connection comes in.
yeah,
Things like wanting to control situations that
yeah,
are obviously out of my control comes from the fact that that loss was truly the ultimate lack
mm,
of control of any
yeah,
situation. It was
sudden, yep.
unexpected. There was no warning. And so for me, there are a lot of things now where I can pinpoint exactly where those needs and like wants and desires and fears come from.
Nice. And that was only because you could not confront it, but
Mhm.
you address those that grief. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. So yeah, I was one that bottled up. TJ knows this, and this DDJF's really helped me talk about
mhm,
grief in that way,
Mhm.
and so I think internally I was always able to point to where everything was. I was a little preactive in that way. I kind of was my own therapist. Um, but there's still a lot I have to go through in that way. And so these stories and stuff help tremendously, and knowing that you're not alone in that way. So I commend you for sharing this with
Thank you.
everyone and being such a change in that
yeah,
way.
Thank you.
great. A question for you, Sydney. What what would you tell someone who's going through grief right now, if it's fresh? What advice or what would you want to say to them?
Not to
What would
be
you tell
afraid
them?
to talk about it. That's really what I share with the kids that I work with because so many people, even in this day and age when so many people experience grief, we still think it's like a taboo topic to talk about. Like, oh, I don't want to bring someone else down by talking about it, or oh, like they would never understand, or I really don't want, people to associate me with loss all the time or think I'm not fun anymore. And so I really want people to share those emotions that they're feeling and talk about it and open that conversation. The same with all mental health. I really
Mm,
want people to just be able to discuss it and understand that so many people go through it and you're not alone. Because when we isolate ourselves, that's when we have more issues. And so for me, it's not making things worse for ourselves and instead sharing, opening up about those emotions and making sure that we are inclusive in our grief and realize that everyone goes through it.
So there's a question here that's a little from Isabel. She says, "What if you have not time? You don't have the time or chances to talk about it." I don't know if she's assuming it's only with a therapist you could talk about, but what would your response be to Isabel?
Yeah, one, it's not, you don't have to just talk to a therapist, friends, family, teachers, coworkers, anyone. I've talked to my dogs about my grief before
Yeah.
because they're there, they're a listening ear. Journaling is another way you can get those emotions out. I know people who express emotions through dance, through singing, through exercising. There are all kind of ways you can get those emotions out, and it's I do encourage people to talk about it, but there are people who can't. It's so traumatic for them that they're not at the point where they can talk about it. So find a way that you can get those emotions out and express it.
Love that, and thank you for the question, Isabel. It's a great one. Okay, so before we get to our final moment where you get to share with whatever you want our community, you can share to our community whatever you want. I have one more question for you.
All right.
You are obviously a dynamic person with many, many accomplishments under your belt. I'm curious to know. This is a question Taj usually asks. But what is next for the one and only Cindy Ford?
As I've said plenty of times before, I think our fate and our purpose is kind of predestined for us. And, things come into our path and we're meant to follow them. So, right now, my goal is to follow those things that come to me and that I recognize are for me and for me to follow. I'm not as crazy as it is to be like super type A and always want control of situations, I'm not a planner so much in a sense that I'm like, okay, this, and this is what I'm doing for my future. I know where I want to be in a sense that I know the type of work I want to be doing. I know I want to continue to help grieving children. I want to expand my nonprofit and I want to get those resources out there. But I firmly believe that those opportunities will present themselves if I continue to do what I'm doing and advocate for grieving youth. And so for me, I don't have a set plan and okay, I'd like to be, working here, here, and here and doing this, and this. I'm going to keep advocating for grieving children no matter where I'm at. And I hope that whatever is meant for me will find me and lead me along that path.
What about your legacy? What do you want when it's 20, 30, 40 years? Is there anything in particular you want your legacy in the grief space or beyond? What do you want your legacy to be? We like to think legacy. I don't know why,
I,
but
I always think of Beyonce's song "I Was Here." Um,
oh,
I really want people to have felt some kind of impact from me, whether they remember my name, whether they say that blonde chick one day, whether they even like register that I was the one who did anything. I want them to have felt some impact from my life. I want them to have benefited in some way. And so I don't know if I necessarily want a legacy in the sense that I want people to ever say, oh, it was Sydney Ford who did this. I want people to come away a better person because of the things that I did. And if, it's because of me directly or because of something that I did that influenced their lives, that's what I want it to be.
that's great.
That is great.
All right. So, Sydney, it's that time where you get the floor to talk about whatever you want to talk about. It could be your favorite cooking recipe. Is there an amazing Netflix show that just has you so enthralled? Is there a dance you're learning on TikTok? Whatever you want to share. It could be about a future book. It could be that you are doing. It could be something else you're working on, a project that's got you excited. Anything you want. The floor is yours. We usually do about a minute, but always welcome to go over. So go ahead and talk to our community, Cindy. The floor is yours.
Well, I'm terrible at cooking and I've binge watched too many Netflix shows to count. So I don't think people want to hear that. But I do want to share some potential resources. Like I said, I am on the National Alliance for Children's Grief, their board, and some of the resources that they provided to help talk to children about the shooting that happened yesterday. And so one of those is the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. They have resources on their website that help to talk to children about traumatic events, as well as the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement has resources that you can use to talk to children about what happened. And so I really think sites like that, looking up those resources, is very helpful for parents who are trying to figure out how to talk to their kids about traumatic events like what happened yesterday. So I wanted to push those resources out there so that people had that support if they wanted it and they knew where to look.
Love it. And both of those will be in our description box. So for anyone who wants to look into that, just give us some time to add it and then it will be there. Well, Sydney, I have to say, we have a lot of great guests. You are right there with them. You've accomplished
Thank
so
you.
much in life, to be an author, a lawyer, and have your own, 501c3 organization. We commend you. And we, like I said before we started, we at the DDJF want to thank you for joining us today and being part of today's show.
Mhm.
Go
And I
ahead.
do want to say before I leave, this
Yeah.
was a big fangirl moment for me because I'm a big fan of the Jackson family as a whole.
Oh, cool.
I have followed through the years. I've danced to many of Michael and Janet's songs. So for me, it was just a big moment for me. TJ, your music as well.
All
Oh,
So
right.
thank you so much,
it
Sydney.
was a fangirl moment for me. And I just want to say thank you for all you guys do. And keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Well,
Sydney.
thank you for impacting everyone, and you're creating your legacy, and you are making a difference in this world. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're gonna sign off. Well, actually, there's one more thing, Sydney. How can people reach you and get in touch
Yes,
with you?
they can go to the Hope After Grief Instagram page. That's one
Okay.
way that people can get in touch with me. I also have an email, hopeaftergrief@gmail.com, that they can reach out on that as well.
There you go. Couldn't end the show without mentioning that. Anyways, everyone out there, thank you guys for joining today. Special thanks to you, Sydney, for being our guest and doing what you do. On behalf of the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, we want to thank everyone for watching or listening, however you consume today's content. Again, we want to remind you that if you want to donate, you can do so at www.ddjf.org. Again, we are also a 501c3 organization. So what we receive goes to our programs, and it is a tax deduction for you when you make that donation. There's also Sydney's Hope After Grief, which again is at www.hopeaftergrief.org. Besides that, we will see you all next Wednesday. Please be safe, love your loved ones, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Adios, everyone. Bye.